All right, folks, we are back in the Fireside PM podcast, and I have a good friend and former manager, Paul Muret, in the Fireside PM pod. And Paul has an amazing story and background. He's perhaps most known for being the CEO of Urchin, which became Google Analytics, then rose to the VP ranks at Google, working in ads and research, maybe some other areas, and now he's looking to the future, and he's going to help us understand like what we're all missing when we think about Gen AI, as well as for PMs, like what we should be thinking about in terms of retooling. Before we get into all that, just welcome to the show, Paul. Would love to hear your kind of version of your background. I know I didn't do it justice.
That's okay. Hey, Tom, thanks for having me. First of all, this is great. I'm glad you're doing these shows and really happy to be a part of this. I really enjoy the mentoring and coaching and diving into various topics with product managers all over the place, and I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah. Well, so when people ask you to introduce yourself, what do you tell them? Do you go with Urchin or do you go with Google?
No, usually it depends on this context, but usually I'm talking more about Google and the work we're doing. I was super lucky to I just left Google and have retired from Google after 19 years.
Wow.
And I was super lucky to have just an incredible career there, a part of some really amazing teams and working with amazing product leaders, engineering leaders, and executives across the organization. And as you mentioned, it started with the acquisition of Urchin Software. I was the co-founder and CEO of Urchin, and that became Google Analytics, which was became larger and more successful than I could have possibly imagined. That was really a fun ride. And so those early days of Google Analytics, and then the Google Marketing Platform and Data Studio and all the kind of measurement tools was really a lot of fun. And then, as you mentioned, I stepped into the product lead role, leading display and video and app advertising during a few years of incredible growth and some exciting and uncomfortable times as well. And then more recently, I joined research and health, and also then was product lead, UX lead for Google Health, and then for Google Research. So I've had an amazing journey through Google, and have just really enjoyed and really appreciate the support and all the amazing teams I've had a chance to work with.
So 19 years at Google, that you must have seen a lot of versions of Google as it evolved. What do you think are some of the things that Google does better than most? Like, what's the magic behind Google? Why is it such a successful company?
Yeah, so first, I think and foremost, Google is a place and has been a place for many years that has brought in and nurtured, I think, some of the top talent in the industry. So you really have, the Jeff Deans of the engineering world, and the Neil Mohans of the product world, and just having an incredible long list of really strong talent within the company. The second thing I would say, maybe this will then segue to some of the other topics you mentioned, is Google has been in AI and machine learning for a long time, and I think because of Google search, Google really understands the notion of quality. What does it mean to drive continuous improvement and be able to continually refine and develop and improve models and subsystems and so forth, so that the experiences that are created for users is really, really great and continues to get more and more amazing. So if you think of whether it's responses in Gmail, or searching for your dog in Google Photos, or of course all the things that are happening in Google Search, machine learning and AI have kind of been a part of all of those systems for many years. Now, certainly there's a new wave of capabilities coming in. I know we want to talk about that, but I think Google has fundamentally been a place where the culture of engineering and of quality and continual improvement has been really central. And I think that's really developed that skill in many, many capacities.
Yeah, I'm actually teaching a strategy class, and one of the case studies is around the AI wars. And one of the things that the case talks about is, to your point, Google had been pioneering and utilizing ML for sure for many, 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 many years. And it's part of what makes search and YouTube recommendations and all over like Google Photos like so powerful. On the other hand, making it available to end users directly in a way that, frankly, I think ChatGPT and now Gemini and Claude do, hadn't been something that Google had done as much, at least. It always felt like it was the secret sauce kind of under the hood. Is that fair? Or
Yeah, I think, I think there was, let's say, a more conservative approach to bringing the technology out. I think Google operates at such scale, both in terms of its consumer products, but across the board, that the company, I think, felt a strong responsibility to make sure that the new technology like that was brought out very responsibly and done in a slow, conservative way. And then, but then when you have ChatGPT and others sort of like jump in front of you and sort of, and move faster, I think it's forced Google, I think, to take this kind of newer, bold and responsible approach where it knows it needs to move faster and innovate quicker, and at the same time make sure responsibility and safety are central. I think we're going to hear a lot about this in the coming Google I/O, I'm sure. But that notion, I think, of being able to move quickly, but also figure out how to scale things, I think is a challenge. But certainly, there's been a reaction, given the ChatGPT launches and so forth.
Yeah, and I still remember late 22, especially after ChatGPT came out. You had given me some advice about AI, and because I think I was initially a little skeptical around Gen AI.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, fine. You can ask it to tell you jokes or write lyrics in the style of Shakespeare or whatever. And you were like, well, look, it starts out with, people being dismissive. And then you think like, okay, maybe it can do some things. And then you really get kind of amazed by it. Where are you now in your sort of cycle of embracing or understanding Gen AI? Do you feel like, wow, this is like man discovering or humans discovering fire, or is it electricity, or is it like mobile phone?
So great question, and I think there is some sort of like curve to how those things play out. But I really think that generative AI and large language models has created a tipping point in this space, so that I really believe this is a paradigm shift that is of equivalent scale and implications as what we saw in the move from, let's say, early flip phones to the smartphone, or the sort of inventions of the internet itself. Like, this is a really profound moment, and it's still playing. It's going to play out over multiple years, and it's still playing out. But the capability, it's both the capabilities of these new systems is moving so rapidly. The capabilities are frankly quite astounding, and you see this sort of reasoning capabilities and other new skills keep compounding more and more of the capabilities, but also the interface itself and how we interact with it has fundamentally changed. So if you think of obviously going from like traditional business to then doing everything on the web, that was like a huge paradigm shift. But then also on our phones, going from just being able to make phone calls, and all of a sudden now, like, okay, I can access apps and all of the different information through my phone on the go all the time. That had a fundamental change to then how you interacted with information and how you interacted with various with your friends and colleagues, and also various organizations. I think the same is true here. I think the interface capabilities where it's not the same as me putting in a query or me clicking on a
Mm.
set of fixed menus. There's now this much more, natural way of communicating with a virtual, an AI system that has incredible capabilities. So I really think that both in the capability standpoint and because of the interface that this changes, I think this is a fundamental shift in what's possible in computing broadly, and it will have, I think, broad ranging implications across many industries, all industries. Some of them feel, I mean, if you think about like language models, like some of the industries that sort of have their own languages, I think of, obviously software development and coding, those are like languages. And then, uh, the legal industry and sort of like laws like its own language, and healthcare is kind of health is like its own language, and its own science. And so I think those areas and many others are particularly ripe for just tons of change and innovation with this new capability that can come in that can help engage with these complex languages in ways that we haven't done before.
So nowadays, any product I'm using, I see AI kind of sprinkled all over it. And it's like, oh, like every feature is now, oh, try this thing. It has a little magic wand or whatever. And um, it sort of aligns to this pattern of existing products that are saying, okay, well, what can I do with Gen AI? Let me add some features that kind of advance this product using that capability. I haven't yet seen any truly AI first products where I'm like, oh, this just never existed. Like the way maybe eBay kind of wouldn't have happened without the internet, or Uber wouldn't have happened without mobile phones. Like maybe ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude are the closest things to like true like de novo businesses.
Yeah.
What's your take on that? Like, is there plenty to do just to kind of upgrade existing products with Gen AI, or do you think there's going to be a lot more new products that just never existed before?
I do think it's going to be both. You bring up a really, you sort of touch on a bunch of different topics there. So let me maybe unpack a few ideas there. I think first, there's so many different kinds of use cases with machine learning and AI. I think it's really important as we think about bringing that kind of technology into our existing products or new products. Are we talking about kind of closed use cases or more open-ended use cases, or what kind of things are we talking about? It's very different. Is it like assistive or co-creation, or is it supposed to sort of grade something? Like what is the purpose of the AI or model that we're trying to use? And I think that also creates a set of complexities and potentially constraints in how these systems can work. So healthcare is kind of an extreme example because it's so highly regulated, and there's obviously safety considerations all the way through. But let me use that as an example. You can't just create an open-ended use case, virtual clinician out of the gate, because what are sort of the rules and regulations around that? Who's going to be responsible for when it makes a mistake? What if users sort of take it in a direction that you'd never tested before? And so I think it's very interesting to think of these open-ended use cases as quite complex versus things that are more closed, where the models and even the interfaces may be quite sophisticated, but maybe the use cases that it's allowed to sort of do are more limited. So it could be like, hey, we're going to help you, schedule appointments with your doctors and maybe do a bit of triage down some decision tree in a way that feels really natural, but we're going to backstop that with, real nurses and folks on the other side. I think as you go from that to something, where the AI system is maybe providing more frontline care, or maybe an assistive way, that's a much more complicated use case. So I think we have to think about these use cases quite deeply and understand the quality considerations, the context, and how to kind of govern those. I think that's going to be a big deal in all of these industries. So maybe I'll pause there. Does that make sense on kind of that like distinction?
Yeah, it does. It also makes me wonder about what do you think is the role of new companies being formed? Is their job to take the foundational work that Gemini and Anthropic and OpenAI are doing and then integrate it into workflows or build new workflows, but use the general models as is largely, maybe with a little bit of tuning? Or do you think that there will be opportunities or it will make sense for companies to build entirely new models? It just seems like such an expensive endeavor that I think a lot of people are like, look, we're not going to try that. We'll just use the API from ChatGPT or Gemini and build on top.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it depends on what the purpose is. I think there's lots of organizations that are looking to apply and integrate AI into various existing work streams. There's so many cases where there's a problem today that these new capabilities could really help with. I mean, one of the ones that we've worked on for years, Tom, you remember, was the diabetic retinopathy
Mm-hmm.
work within Google Research, being able to deploy an AI, ML system that can take, give it a picture of the back of somebody's retina, and it can grade kind of the degeneration of the retina, on a grading scale, as part of a diabetes, screening, which is super important because it's the number one cause of blindness, and if you don't do the regular screening, it'll get too far before it kind of, too far along before you really get the symptoms. So, but there's not enough ophthalmologists that can do that kind of screening around the world. It's not even close.
Mm-hmm.
So the ability to, take those images, from a technician, send it off to an AI system, have it graded, come back, and it can be like, red, yellow, green, like, okay, these cases are, fine. These ones are clearly bad. Maybe the ones in the middle, you do send to an ophthalmologist or something. That's incredibly useful, but that system needed to be, extra tuned just for that use case to ensure that we understood the quality metrics against the criteria we're looking for. And so I think again, we're going to see these kind of applications of more, either bespoke models or tuned models or prompt engineered models that are able to with the right guardrails, go down a path that's pretty unique. But then I think we're also going to see, brand new experiences, come out. And one of the areas that I'm particularly interested in, I think, is really the agent-based type work that's really going on, and both within some of the larger, big tech companies, but also in some of the startups. And when you again, like, this is a really complex direction to go. But if you think about the reasoning capabilities and the ability to sort of plan and think through complex problems, well, how can you go from this kind of synchronous, I ask it a question and it sort of like, comes back with a long response. I ask it a follow-on question. Like, how do you go from just a synchronous dialogue to something that is a little more autonomous, that I can give it a task that maybe is more complicated that it can go off and do for me.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it takes, hours or days to finish or something. And it comes back and says, hey, and it's checking in and saying, here's what's going on, but giving a system like that more autonomy, more tools to be able to use is a very powerful direction I think we're going to see, but also comes with lots of, safety and control considerations depending on what direction it's going. But I think that kind of area it's such a different thing than what's happening. I think we're going to see some new organizations and new companies, step into the light as part of that.
Yeah, that's super exciting. When you talk to people today about Gen AI and where it's going, what would be something that you think a lot of people are missing or not thinking enough about that goes beyond kind of the initial oohs and ahs of of how cool it is? Like, what are the things that we should be thinking about?
So I think so. Two things come to mind. First, on this thing what we were just talking about with that, like the ophthalmology example,
Mm-hmm.
is the notion of validation and control. One of the most important parts of that system was not just the grading capability that the AI system could do. It was the system that came before it, that when you first send the retinal images into the system, it would first check to see if they were gradable. Like, do I actually have images that look okay? Are they cropped
Mm-hmm.
improperly? Is they blurry? You know, and there was this one use case where, as we were doing deployments in India, where we were seeing all these images getting thrown out of this one, clinic, and it was like 50% of the images were not gradable. And we're like, what's going on there? And so then, we show up and realize, like, oh, they have a broken camera, or the lighting's no good, or there's these other issues that are going on that you wouldn't necessarily know you have those problems if you were just like focused on the kind of end application only. So I think it's important to think about, in a little more holistic way, the full experience you're trying to create and what kind of controls do you need along the way. That's the first thing. The second, related to that, is there's a tendency, whenever we have kind of new shiny, technology toys, there's a tendency to say, like, well, I got this new shiny thing. Let me go throw this at users, and they're going to love it.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of really understanding, like, what is the user's needs, what are the problems I'm actually solving, and really approaching the development in a traditional user-centric way. So I think it's great we have all this technology, but sometimes you have to kind of almost put that a little bit on the back shelf and be like, what's the problem first? And then, yes, you want to think about, like, hey, this technology potentially could change how we even interact with our users. So let's explore that. But I think making sure the development process is good old fashioned, user centric, I think is something that can get missed too often.
Yeah, yeah, and that does tie into what changes and what doesn't change for PM skill sets. Before we jump into that, I did want to ask you. I as you know, I started dabbling in some angel investing, and I cannot tell you how many AI copilot for blank I've seen. Copilot for immigration lawyers, copilot for tax accountants, copilot for etc. And I'm curious, like, from your perspective, do you feel like, yes, those are great sustainable businesses, or do you think the general purpose models will actually do that fine and you won't even need a bespoke one? Or do you think maybe because of some of the controls and tuning and kind of thoughtfulness you just described, there will be all these little vertical opportunities for new businesses?
Yeah, I kind of I think there's a window for sure where I think that a little bit of that specific verticalization, I think, is very needed and will allow a lot of opportunity in a way that I think is deeper than what we saw with the sort of .com.
Mm-hmm.
There was like pets.com and everything.com, and like, just, there was this like standard model of like, okay, let me take the thing and let me just put a .com after it and try to make it, web enabled, and then that'll solve all the problems.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of those businesses, didn't make it. Some of them did. There was a good amount of consolidation. I think the capabilities are so much deeper here that then therefore the sort of quality and controls are also much deeper. And so I do think there's a need for, there's a need and I think in the room for more vertical, I think, specialization to kind of bring some of these things into the market and really, develop those. And whether we see then some reconsolidation over time, that's possible, depending on how much, commonality. But I think we will see, I think, some of this vertical application, and I think there'll be a need for that for at least the foreseeable, short term here.
Yeah, it reminds me, I've heard some people talking about the startup opportunity to do AI orchestration which is like tying all of these steps together, all these controls together. Yeah, maybe deep down it runs on Gemini or ChatGPT 4, but to make it really work for that lawyer or for that accountant or whatever, you really do have to kind of tie it all together and provide kind of a curated experience across the key workflows, et cetera, that the off-the-shelf LLM is not going to do it in the same way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There is possible, with this kind of multi-agent world, it's possible that, we have a few like personal agents that then help us do some of that coordination. But I think when, whether it's like travel or health, I mean, I want the Mayo Clinics, like, I want their AI system helping me, not, and then when I'm traveling, I want like TripAdvisor or someone else's like, expertise there, kind of thing. So I think we're going to see some of that, but we may still have some generic capabilities that we want to engage in that help us through our daily lives.
Okay, so let's talk to the PMs in the audience who, let's say, they've been PMs for a while, and how does their job change with all of the new kind of opportunities with Gen AI? Is it still, understand the customer, figure out a problem, come up with a solution, work with the team, test and learn, all that kind of stuff? Or are there new kind of competencies that we all need to think about?
Yeah, I think I do think there's some new competencies that product managers need to add on top. But before we go there, maybe we touch on because I think you're pointing out like some of the fundamentals are still really, really critical. And I think as we touched on, I think one of the most important jobs that I think a product manager needs to do and can do for their organization is to bring that user centricity to the organization, so that to really connect deeply with users and use that as a foundation for developing the strategy and all this stuff. And I just think that's so critical. And I often will suggest, you've probably heard me say this before, Tom, but I suggest also that like the context of those things really matter. I think when we engage with our users, and I always encourage product managers to use that as an opportunity to understand the broader picture. So it's not just the surveys. Those things are useful, like surveys and maybe some like remote UX studies and bringing people in, and like that stuff's good. But it's so much more powerful when you go to the user, whether it's their business or or in the clinic or it's in the home, whatever. Like go where they are and really understand the context of what they're dealing with, because sometimes you have a bigger picture than you sort of see what's really happening. Like maybe the person has constant interruptions happening all the time, or you can feel the pressure of delivery of something. Or when we were traveling in London and we visited the Royal Free Hospital there in London, it was so interesting to see that there was like a shortage of desktop or computers on wheels kind of situation. And when the person badged it would take so long to like badge in and get that thing to like ramp up to where they actually had screens that were useful. We were like counting like the minutes would go by, that you realize like, oh, they can't use this system in a quick answer kind of thing. It's not set up that way. And so they have these other constraints. So I think understanding that context, I think, can really highlight like what's the problem and the kind of durable problems that we're really trying to tackle, and what is sort of the context there. And I think that's such an important part of product management and helping clarify the strategy, get crisper about the problem space and the segmentation of users, but also it's a chance to inspire the organization. There's nothing like bringing the engineers and the the program managers and UX people, like bring them with you and have them participate and hear those things firsthand. People get incredibly passionate about solving the problems, and they'll have a clear view of like why are we approaching it a certain way. So I think that part of, I think, product management hasn't changed. I feel like that's the same. And I know you've got many other elements of kind of good product management that I think are all still true. I think though we're in a period of rapid development that means that it's going to be a little hard to rely and predict, to kind of rely on existing indicators and existing models as the prediction of what's going to happen next. So I think when it comes to like market analysis and sort of like strategic positioning within various industries, I think the product managers are going to have to figure out how to look beyond what's there today and start to abstract a little bit, like where do we think these things potentially are going and what kind of bets do we want to place? And that's going to require, I think, PMs to be, I think, to have some good intuition on different advances within AI in the space, and to be really familiar with, the kind of like what really works with these tools and what's not, and kind of where is the research and where is the development going? Like what are the OpenAI's and Google's, what are they working on? What's coming next, so you can form a thesis that's based a little bit on kind of the research and science, and not just on the market side of it only, because I think the market will be disrupted in many ways, and we're going to see, and you could get surprised. So I think that's probably the one skill where we're in this kind of unstable market period, and that'll require, I think, a little more foresight and that being familiar with a lot of these kind of newer technologies, and thinking through like how those are going to play out in the specific area that the PM is working on.
So where do you see the puck going in terms of the future development of new AI capabilities? Like everybody sees what we can see today. Are there kind of particular frontiers that you're super excited about, that you're like, wow, we're just getting started around X, and like that's going to be a huge deal? Or what's your thoughts on what you're most excited about?
Yeah, and there's I think there's a lot of really good insights and opinions that folks have on this, and it's moving quite quickly. So I'm sure whatever I say today, like in 6 months from now, I'll be like, oh, I don't know what I was talking about. So I think one thing I would say though is that I was really impressed with the kind of these larger models developing new capabilities as almost an ancillary process to attack the primary objective. Let's say whether it's language models, they would to see the model develop capabilities in math, or capabilities in translation, or capabilities in reasoning, kind of on its own, in order to solve these more complex, language, problems. So that and the pace of that is really pretty, amazing. So I think we're going to see a continued push in this direction where things like reasoning and planning and tool use and analytical capabilities, there's many dimensions of analytical capabilities, like science and spatial reasoning and et cetera, et cetera. There's just that these things will continue to get developed, and I think that will create an environment where we both have sort of superhuman capabilities in many areas, and also the ability for these systems to move more into this kind of autonomous agent-based space where they can tackle, problems that typically required, stricter, step-by-step work with humans. Now they can sort of take over some of those more complex capabilities. So I think this is a, really interesting time and space. And we're seeing, I think already, some of the, I think just coding in general, like seeing software engineers, like there's no software engineer today who's not using one of the, multiple of
Mhm.
these systems to help them write code. And it's awesome. It's like it's incredible. You can say, oh, Paul, go write some Python to do whatever. Like, oh, no problem. Like, you know, even though I haven't used that language in a while, or maybe I have, like so. So I think we're going to see those, co-creation and assistive experiences in complex areas like health and like legal and so forth. We're going to see those continue to move forward. But then I think the thing to really watch out for, I think, is sort of the autonomous agent based space,
Wow.
because that brings a whole new level of capabilities, but also a new level of responsibilities and safety considerations. And that's where we're going to see, I think, a lot of, I think the society and politics and all that's going to start to, I think that's the area where that will play, that'll become, I think, a more interesting conversation for sure.
Yeah, I mean that autonomous agent stuff. It sounds like we would be going from like, oh, I'll ask this thing a question and it'll give me an answer. It'll give me a response, to like, go solve this problem and take action that might be multi-step and have hundreds of different permutations. Like, just go figure it out, which is pretty crazy and amazing, very human-like, but also like kind of scary to the extent that if you're like, oh, make sure my lawn is healthier, and it starts controlling my like irrigation system, and then starts like cutting off water for me because it wants to give it more to the lawn or something. I don't know, like it does some things that it thinks are aligned with what I asked it to do, but has these unintended consequences. Am I being too paranoid, or how do you feel about like the potential degrees of freedom with these agents doing things that we don't want them to do?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and I think that, and that's why I think there'll probably be some pushback. I think, in this direction, in this area, and it'll be important for the larger tech companies, but certain, and then also some of the early, startups that are working in various spaces to quickly kind of figure out, what are the sort of ethical and moral considerations, and what are the guardrails that we think and my guess is the like what's acceptable today and tomorrow is likely to shift over time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've seen this in other areas too, where like kind of what's sort of acceptable to users in society in a particular area. When something's new, everyone might be pretty concerned, like, well, we don't think that makes sense. But then you realize that actually the benefits kind of outweigh the risks in many of these areas. So let's go a little further, and we've figured out how to mitigate the downsides here. So I think that's where I think these areas will have to develop over time. And I think we'll see a continuing evolution of capabilities in various spaces that I think if you fast forward and you grabbed one of those and you came back to today and said it can do this, I think we'd all be, oh my God, that seems really dangerous or really scary. But maybe along this journey, we've kind of, as a society and as a set of technology companies, we've figured out like, well, what are the guardrails that you actually need to have in place to be able to do this effectively? So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and I think I'm sure it'll be not it'll have this ride's going to have some bumps along the way, I'm sure.
Yeah, it does have some. It feels a little bit analogous to the self-driving cars, where like, oh, now this car is making all these decisions, and it may decide to do things that I haven't thought about, or we as society hadn't thought about enough. But on the other hand, like, I just took a Waymo ride a month ago, and it was pretty amazing, and I was kind of blown away. So we'll
Yeah,
have
I
to.
mean the number of people that die in car accidents every year due to human error
Yeah.
is quite large, and and then you think of accessibility considerations and so forth. So there's a tremendous amount of good that can happen
Mhm.
here, and I think that, but we
Yeah.
also know that that we have to be responsible and think about, with the increased capabilities, we need to think about, what are the downsides, and really work to control those.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, anytime people bring up, oh, some autonomous car did something, had a bad accident, I look around, just, I see all these distracted high school drivers, and I'm like, I don't know if I trust them much more. Probably not. So we'll have to see how that develops. And it sounds like there will be many frontiers of technology, kind of pushing the boundaries and maybe reconfiguring what we think is typical versus not in the years to come. Paul, before we wrap up, I did want to add one other topic, which is like career advice. You have had the privilege of working under some pretty incredible Google leaders like Susan Wojcicki and Jeff Dean, and Huber and many others. What are some like interesting or key leadership traits or lessons you've picked up from them that you'd be open to sharing with the audience?
Yeah, so great question, and I think whenever I'm talking with someone about career choices and so forth, I always bring up two things. One is like, who is your manager? Who would be your manager? And secondly, is this an area that you're passionate about? And if those two things are a yes, then usually I give people a thumbs up, like, hey, well, that sounds like a good area. Because it's so important to have, to be a part of a team and to have a manager or a leader who you're inspired by, you respect, and you feel like is really vested in your growth and is giving you the space and the opportunity to succeed and to grow and those things, and to feel that support. I think that's an incredibly important thing that we need to look forward. So yeah, I've been super lucky with Susan and Sridhar, and the ads organization, and Jeff Dean and research, and way back with Jeff Huber. And, each of them were very different, and each had their superpowers, and I would just be amazed at, and I would learn from them. And so they would challenge me in various, dimensions, kind of based on what their working style is. And I've learned some incredible things. I could tell one funny story with Susan. Susan's one of the most authentic people I've ever worked with. Like if she's talking to you one-on-one, or if she's on stage in front of thousands, you feel like almost the same connection, because she's so pure and just like, I'm here. This is who I'm, what we're about. Just she brings her authentic self to every conversation in a way that is incredibly powerful. I always really admired that with her. And as part of that, she, I think, understands, like, you need to be able to have all, your conversations need to be able to be had out in the open. Like, you should be able to be okay with, my values and what I believe in. And, you may have some confidential things, but I should be able to have pretty much open conversations. And so there was this one time when there was this other product director on the team who I really had a hard time working with. And this person came much more from like kind of a marketing background, and I was coming much more from an engineering background. And we just we weren't seeing eye to eye. And the person was, he was from like England, and he was like super cut and fit. He looked like kind of a James Bond kind of character. I was a little worried he had like a license to kill. I wasn't totally sure. But one time I was so fed up, I sent Susan an email saying like, oh my gosh, this person, so annoying. Here's all the things they've done. Just like, it's terrible. And she proceeded to add him to the email thread and said, it sounds like you two have something to work out. I'll let you guys figure it out. And I was like mortified. I was like, oh my God, did she just do that? Like, and it was a growth moment for sure. I remember walking down then to the cafe like 20 minutes later, and I ran into him, and he was, he was furious. He was so mad, and I thought, man, I really hope he doesn't have that license to kill. I'm in trouble. Like, but it forced me to, it's like, hey, I should have had the conversation with him first. I
Hmm.
should have been able to be open about, like, hey, here's how I'm approaching the work, and here are things that I'm not uh, you know not excited about in the work you're doing. That I'm sure this person was very capable and had, was amazing, but they just had a very different approach. And we could have had that conversation ahead of time, and I should have been able to do that in a more open way. So you learn some of these, hard lessons sometimes, in really interesting ways. But I was so lucky to have Susan and Sridhar Ramaswamy and Jeff and everybody as just incredible mentors. And I always felt supported, challenged, and given the the space to really succeed and grow. And when I'm working with a team, I'm always thinking about that and how I can pass that down to the team I'm working with.
19 years at Google, you've probably grown and learned so much over that period of time. What do you, when you look back now and you think about when you were the best version of yourself, like what were some of the key things that you did or values you kind of prioritize that helped you be effective?
Yeah. So I think first, kind of along these dimensions we've been talking about, I think it's really important to create a team culture that makes it safe
Mm,
for people to feel like they're part of a bigger thing, and to allow them to come together and feel safe to be creative, and safe to play devil's advocate, and safe to explore and make mistakes, and to feel supported. So I think that creating a inclusive team environment where there's a lot of understanding and respect for everyone in the team.
mhm.
Ideas can come from, the person, the, intern is just right there, or it can come from the top. It doesn't, having a really inclusive team culture, to me, is something that I've always, worked hard to create. And I could see how, over the years, I could see how that really played out, and how it really did help us create new things and succeed and try things, and then deal with adversity in ways that, were more sustainable and more connected. So that was really important. And then the second thing also is to, I've learned how to, kind of create the story of your vision.
Mm,
And sometimes it means you have to kind of take a bet on what you think is the story.
mhm.
Um, One of my, I think, most favorite kind of keynotes or whatever I've done over the years. One was on when we launched real time reporting in Google Analytics, and it was, if you have a couple more minutes, it's such a,
Yeah.
Google Analytics had grown so big so fast that just kind of like riding that wave was just a really big deal. And like,
Mhm.
and but anyway, and the reporting was pretty fresh. For most websites, it would take, or apps, it would take about 10, 15 minutes for the data to arrive and then show up in the reporting and so forth. So it's pretty good. And for larger sites, it'd be a little longer. But I knew that it would be game changing if we could have it be real time, like literally within a second.
Mm,
That would change the way people use the data and they use the tool. And this came from, just all the user-centric research and context that we talked about before, of really understanding, like, what are people trying to do, and what could they be doing with this. So I had this sense that the agility of digital marketing and just business intelligence was the need for truly, like, agile, in the second decision making that was going up and up and up, that this idea of creating real-time reporting became really important. But I never knew I literally thought we couldn't do it because we just the system was so large. It's like we're not going to be able to do that. It's going to be way too expensive. And then and then there was a researcher out of our Irvine team, Mayur Deshpande, and him and his colleagues are just geniuses. They realized and they built a demo to say, hey, we can actually do this if we take advantage of a little bit of the collection network and kind of the edges of the network we had created, and do some peer-to-peer shuffling and things like that. And they were able to get a couple orders of magnitude of kind of data shuffling performance, because collecting all that data every second and trying to get it all organized and then show you, like, here's a moving graph of how many people are actually on your site right now and what they're doing. I just thought that would be incredible. But I was worried that once they showed me the demo, I said, well, this is great, but I need you to scale this to 100% before I can tell anybody about it. So, because if you get part way and then I can't roll it out, then it's going to be really bad. Like then we got stuck and we have to unroll the feature, and it could be really bad. So they spent a year like productionizing and scaling the system. And so it was fully live and ready to go, but just hidden for everyone. And so we never do this anymore, but we turned it on while I was on stage giving yeah, it was, you get a little nervous, of course, but I gave this whole talk about agility, and I had this whole, analogy about, sports analogy going on and this whole thing. But I was really convicted around like this was a really crucial moment for this product and for the direction of this industry to move to something that could be, keeping pace with how people are thinking about their business today. And anyway, so we launched it on stage, and it was just, it was super fun. Everybody was just going crazy, like, and that was one of my favorite moments. But I think it's that I felt like I had clarity in my own head on like what we were trying to accomplish, what was the problem, and what was this huge innovation we were doing, and be able to tell that story in that way was just really a lot of fun. So I think that's the other element maybe for our product folks to be thinking about.
When you advocated for investing a year to make that possible, was that generally, was there a consensus internally, like, okay, yeah, this is worth investing in, or was this something where you were kind of sticking your how did that land internally to go in this direction?
Yeah, I think there definitely have been some features like that where I had to, provide air cover and kind of stick my neck out. I think this is one that it was a bit mixed, but then I think once people saw that, hey, this actually might scale, I think people, it built up, there was more and more momentum internally that, kind of got behind it. So, yeah, anytime I can help, create that shield or whatever, kind of clear the path to help people succeed, I'm always looking to do that. So that was it was an amazing team, and I really enjoyed that part of it. It was super fun.
Yeah, and that conviction that you had, it sounds like there wasn't one customer conversation or one study or one analysis that you looked at. It sounds like you were kind of synthesizing maybe lots of data points over a period of time to know, like, oh yeah, this is going to be a huge deal.
Yeah, that's right. And so, yeah, sometimes the decisioning is more concrete, where customers are asking for specific things, like, hey, we got to figure out how to solve this problem. Mm-hmm. This is one where it was more of the latter of what you're saying. It was more of an instinct of what I was seeing and what people were trying to accomplish, and then projecting forward to say, man, what would it be like if you had this level of reporting happening in the moment? Like, how would that change what you could do? And there were enough like things like, oh, that would change this, that would change this, and that would change this. And I just thought, man, this is going to be, I think, a really big deal. And the more I looked at it, the more I was like compelled that, yeah, this is exactly what I want, and also what I think our customers are going to be excited about.
That's great. And then sounds like it did work when they flipped the switch while you were on stage.
Yeah, we did. It did work. I remember giving the talk, and I was building up this whole thing about this agility and and so forth. And so it was pretty clear, I think, by the end of it, like I was about to announce this really big thing, and this person in the front row like started clapping or something. I was like, "Not yet, hold on, like one more slide," And so we launched it on stage, and everybody was like opening their laptops, and because we literally like turned it on for everyone like while we were there, and it was like pandemonium for a few minutes. Like people were like, we had to like wait for the room to like quiet down. Like it was like there were whoops and hollers, and it was just really fun and cool.
So cool.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for coming on the show. I felt like we probably have only scratched the surface on the stories that you've got stored away, and I'm excited to have you back on maybe in a couple months to talk about other things that you're seeing out there and other lessons that you can share with everybody.
Yeah, looking forward to it, Tom. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Okay. All right, that is